Good evening, Rabbi Eisenberg. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And how are you?
Yes, all right. Different night, but same idea. So it's oh, you're back at home. I can see you got the home front and the back.
I've got the home background. Can't
Yeah,
run away.
so it looks like you got a new picture, what's I guess on your left. That one wasn't up. I've not seen that one before. I've always seen the
well,
one on the other side.
well spotted. Well spotted. Um, it is a bit of a different evening, and obviously we're coming live on Monday night instead of Sunday, by design this week. Very much as it is a very special evening that we're sharing with hundreds of other communities as we commemorate Rabbi Jonathan Sacks
Absolutely.
on the evening of his yacht site.
Hmm.
Um, Rabbi
Before
Sacks
we
will
even
be
start, I was
sorry.
just thinking that before we even start, I'll actually do a quick pan over here.
Yes, sir.
That's got that hanging in my office. That was when Rabbi Sacks came to our shul for my induction. Actually, I have a picture from Rabbi Sacks. I was just, as you mentioned, I was just looking to my right again, and there he is, smiling at me. Smiles at me every day.
He so well let's it's worth talking about him. Obviously you knew him personally, and of the view that a lot of us have who perhaps weren't lucky enough to have had a personal relationship with him, is that he he was a very different kind of chief rabbi,
Mm.
and I think first of all, what I'd like to say is that being a rabbi in general is from my perspective what I've got to know of you, and over the course of our discussions, it isn't an easy position to sit in because people look to you for guidance, spiritual guidance. They look to you for inspiration. They look to you for sometimes practical advice, and I think as Rabbonim in general, there's a lot of it's a multifaceted role. Being the chief rabbi of England, of the Commonwealth, um, is more than that. You're not just a rabbi to an average congregant over the UK. You're also, in many ways, he was the first line of contact. He was the first image of a Jew publicly that people got to meet, whether that be from outside of the Jewish community. So this is really the forward-facing face of our community to perhaps more Gentile populations. And over the course of his career on the radio, on the television, through the numerous books that he wrote, an entire nation, maybe the entire world, got to know a very decent and a very different type of Judaism, to that which we are most commonly surrounded by every day. It was a very cerebral and intelligent form of Judaism that worked almost on every level, but it was broadcast to that lowest common denominator so that everybody could understand it. And I think that's a almost impossible balance to strike. And I would therefore like to think that the role of chief rabbi is something that is immensely difficult to get
Wow.
right.
I would say, I've had people in the past once or twice saying to me, and again, I'm not saying this in any arrogant way. It's just what people have said to me in the past. I said, Rabbi, one day you're going to make it to chief rabbi, and I always say the same thing: God forbid. Because I truly believe it is probably one of the most difficult jobs to have in the book. Being a rabbi, as you said, it's not always an easy job. Yes, sometimes sometimes it's easier. At times it's a very difficult job. At times it's very demanding. Very much being in the limelight, and then people expecting tremendous amounts from you at different junctures in their life, and really for you to be there for them at any point in time, whether they're going through a simcha, whether they're going through a tragedy, whether somebody's unwell in the family, whether they just need they just need a helping hand or just a listening ear. All those things are part of the job of the rabbi. But when it comes to chief rabbi, the balance to strike, and it's a very, very difficult balance. The balance to strike is to try and, on the one hand, keep Okay, I'm going to be very, very blunt about this. But on the one hand, keep the left happy, and the other hand, also not antagonize the right, or vice versa, keep the right happy and not antagonize the left. And knowing from the media what I know, and Baruch Hashem, I've been able to keep out of both the Chronicle and the Telegraph, and long may it last. I don't, I don't really like to see myself in newspapers. Usually, when you get into newspapers, it's not for good reasons. I try to keep out of newspapers, but that there will be always people listening, and there'll always be people scrutinizing and wanting to know what did he say and what did he mean, and was that a little bit too frum, or was that not frum enough? And there'll always be somebody there to take a shot at you. And I think the tightrope is getting tighter and tighter. Like nowadays, you're just walking. I don't know how Rabbi Mervis does it, but you're literally walking on a thin string that might be a millimeter thick, and you need to get across it. And on both sides, you look down, you got the hyenas on the bottom on both sides just waiting to bite at you. So to be able to do that job and to do it in a good way is really, it's an amazing thing. On the other
And
hand, I would say, knowing from the inside what it's like for someone to be a chief rabbi, because my father was chief rabbi in Austria, so I did grow up with an inside glimpse at that. I do believe that the job of the chief rabbi in many aspects is more outward facing than inward facing. And as you said, he was the face of Judaism to so many people. So if somebody said, you know any Jews, if you were to go around the UK and ask if you know any famous Jews, chances are one of the people they would mention is Lord Sacks, Chief Rabbi Sacks. And the
yeah,
reason is because he made such an impression on everyone, and whatever he said rang true, whether you were Jewish or whether you weren't. It had a very, as you said, on the one hand, a very philosophical sound to it, which meant that people who weren't Jewish could digest it and would make sense to them. And yet I think it was rooted quite a bit as well in Jewish thought. And so it had that very interesting balance that he was able to strike, in a way, being able to look outward, but also being able to look inward.
it's interesting because with him, he's almost like he was almost like the safest pair of hands you could imagine, in terms of if you needed somebody to represent us on the world stage, if you needed somebody that could talk to politicians, could talk to school children, could talk to news night presenters, whatever it may be, you knew that he always had the answer to the question. And I think if you've ever read any of his books or listened to him talk, it very, very quickly you understand that this is somebody of immense intelligence, but immense learning as well on an academic level. That is, you rarely see it, and you rarely see it with Torah scholars as well. And you're right. I mean, you looked like you were walking that balance there when you said it, but it is that balance between how to speak to the left and also to the right. So if we're going to be totally open and honest about this, his version and his interpretation of Torah was extremely intelligent, so that the left could very much appreciate all of its precepts and why he was making those arguments, but also was respected by the right. It may have not been the sort of yeshivish form of learning that they were used to, but they knew instantly from listening that this is a Talmud Chacham beyond compare. And really, therefore, cannot be judged and couldn't be judged by reference to other people.
Right. And I think that's basically what happened. I think, as you move more and more to the right, you will find that there will be people that will be unhappy with no matter who the chief rabbi is. And I think, that's part of what you just have to accept within this job. Again, as I said, he's not meant to be the rabbi for that part of the demographic of the Jewish community. And I think that's fine. Knowing full well who your community is. I think we've had this conversation sometimes about running certain programs in shul. And we said there might be a lot of people from other shuls that are really happy to tune into this program. But if our people aren't tuning into this program, then in reality, what we've done is we've just put up forward a very, very good face for call the shul whatever you want to, but we've not done anything for our people. And in reality, we really need to be speaking to our people. So if you're looking very, very right, Hasidim might not have looked to him, or very yeshivish people might not look to him for guidance or for anything in particular. But that's fine, because I don't think he was there really to represent them. And I think he understood that his mission was not to be there for the ultra orthodox, but his mission was really to be there for the middle of the road Jew, and left of that, and certainly as well for the outside world, to say, look, this is a Judaism that is palatable. I think it's also a Judaism that's intelligent. I think that's part of it, because I find specifically nowadays, when the intelligentsia, when the academia is very much bent on science, on atheism, on people being agnostic, and you have someone like Lord Sacks that comes forward and is a voice of reason, that they can also start to have to grapple with. I don't know that if your yeshivish guy would stand up and have a conversation with a guy at Oxford, that's going to go very well. Whereas Lord Sacks did have the ability to do that. And suddenly people were out there and were able to say, you know what? Judaism has a point. Judaism is not just a whole bunch of people who are primitive from 3,000 years ago that keep primitive laws. But rather, when Rabbi Sacks put it forward, he put it forward so beautifully, so eloquently, and so cogently that we, and not only us, but people on the outside could read this and say, you know what? The man's got a point. And I think that's really, really important.
And towards the end of his life, he recorded some interviews and podcasts where he spoke. He lived through the first lockdown, and he was able to see the political disparity, I suppose, and disconnectedness in America, because that was at its peak at the time. There were often unhelpful or unpleasant things happening to Jewish people all over the world. And one of the things that he spoke about was, it's all well and good having this intelligence, but you have to be able to have what he referred to as flexible intelligence. That is, not to be so steadfast in your arguments that you are going to constantly clash with the other person, that you have to allow some room in your own belief for the views of the other party as well, which is very important. It's one of those things that in society at the moment threatens to polarize all of us, that we all feel very entitled to our beliefs, sometimes so much so that we will go to war on those beliefs, and that sometimes a little bit of flexibility and a little bit of understanding, and that intelligence goes both ways.
Yeah. I think we had this conversation 2 weeks ago about the fact that that we've become so entrenched in our beliefs, and even if you're liberal, you become so entrenched in your beliefs that you don't allow for people to have beliefs outside of your beliefs. And I think to allow for that conversation is very, very important. I think it also, I know for myself as a rabbi, I've had conversations with people. I remember somebody coming and sitting down with me and saying to me, Rabbi, I want to discuss faith with you. I said, okay. So he says to me, he says, but I'll tell you the same thing that I told Yossi Chazan when I spoke to him. I said to him, he sat down with me and he said to me, he said, listen, whatever his name was, I want you to know I'm not wasting my time here. So I want you to know that if I can convince you of the truths of Judaism, I want to know that you're going to become religious. To which the other side, the fellow from our shul said to him, all right, but I'd like to say the opposite as well. I want to know from you that if I can convince you, you'll give up your pulpit and you'll start being a rabbi. Yeah. And I remember he told me that conversation right from the start. And I said to him, listen, I'm not willing to have the discussion on those terms, because that means you're invested and I'm invested. You're invested in how you feel. You don't want to change your life, really. And, the truth is, I don't really want to give up my job at the moment, and I don't really want to get into an argument with someone. I don't think I will do, but I wouldn't want to even risk getting into an argument with someone where I made a promise and said, if he had a question for me that I couldn't answer, I would give up my job. I don't think you'd be very happy with that. If I called you, David, I just had an argument with so-and-so. He convinced me. I'm out. That's it. I'm gone. You wouldn't want that. I don't want that either. But that means that I'm not open to hear what you have to say, and you're not really open to hear what I have to say. And I think that flexibility of being able to hear somebody else's voice, really being able to hear it and understand it, and being able to.
And you know what? I think that's the point of what Rabbi Sacks was trying to say, that we can share each other's views and we can listen to one another without having to put something at stake, without having to make that deal that, okay, I'm going to tell you what I believe, but if you listen to it and you find that compelling, I want you to give up everything for me. That wasn't the version of Judaism that he represented. It wasn't the version of flexible intelligence that he represented. And I think that he always left a little bit of room for other people's arguments. And tonight we're going to be talking about the idea of community and how that's evolved. And towards the end of his life, especially during the pandemic, he was able to see that social media and technology was able to connect us, but it was also poses a threat sometimes, because it gives all of us that individual voice that sometimes we scream so loud I that we forget to scream we. And that sometimes we forget to find the things that we have in common, and we concentrate on the things that divide us. So it's a very interesting way to look at this. We have a clip which we're going to begin with. It's a very short clip. It's for about
Let me
4
just,
or
can
5
I just
minutes.
say as an introduction,
You
just
can.
before you do that, basically when David and I were preparing for tonight, what we had really wanted to do at one point is we had wanted to find some people that knew the late Chief Rabbi very well and would have been able to give us an interview and then tell us about what it was like, what it was like being in front of the Chief Rabbi, because we all knew him as a great thinker, but he wasn't only a great thinker and theologian, but he was also a great human being. But there were very few people that actually were allowed into that inner sanctum to become his good friends. And we couldn't really find anyone, but I spoke to a lady at the office of Rabbi Sacks. So I think it's called the Lord Sacks Legacy Trust, the Rabbi Sacks Legacy Trust. And its mission is to ensure Rabbi Sacks' ideas and teachings continue to inspire ours and future generations. That's really what they're all about. And this lady said to me, Joanna, who really worked for Rabbi Sacks when Rabbi Sacks worked in the office of Chief Rabbi. When Rabbi Sacks then retired and Rabbi Mervis took over, this lady moved over to the office of Rabbi Sacks and remained his PA at the office of Rabbi Sacks, and was extremely close with him. And then, continues to work at this Rabbi Sacks Legacy Trust. And she said to me, better than having some form of interview where you discuss Rabbi Sacks and what he was like to have over for Shabbos at a Kiddush, or what it was like having him as a rabbi in your community. Says really learning his Torah would be the greatest way to commemorate him, which is why tonight, which is the 20th of Cheshvan, which is the first Yartzeit, after a short illness last year, he passed away, and it's the first Yartzeit now. So what we'd like to do is, that's why we're having this tonight, is we're going to be learning his Torah. We're going to be seeing some of his content, whether it is spoken content. We also have some written content that we're going to be reading out and discussing, and really questions that he grappled with and he tried to figure out, and we're going to try to understand through the prism of his lens. And that's what we'd like to do tonight. So before, I just wanted to give that sort of as an introduction before we show the video, because this video is part of anybody who's really interested in seeing these things. I'm going to put this now on the private chat here, and you can put it on the public chat. These are the different conversations actually that are available. You can go and you can look at the different. They've made 5 different conversations, and these conversations are about community, family, Israel, Jewish identity, and religion and science. Those are 5 different sets of pages. Each one of them it's got a video in it at the beginning. It's got a few quotes of his. It got some enlightening questions to think about what Rabbi Sacks' perspective was and what he meant to say in each one of these things. If you want to do that together with your families, with your children, if you want to do it with friends or neighbors, whoever it might be, there it is. Here's the website. You can go online and you'll see over there all of the material is available. If you want to read along with us tonight, also we're going to be discussing community. So that's really number 1 on that website. If you scroll down, you'll see the 5 different topics. Number 1 is community. So thank you so much for joining us for this. And David, time to hear what Rabbi Sacks had to say about community.
Speaking of thinking locally, or the particularity, So what does it mean to be part of a community nowadays? On the Jewish end, you can think of a person whose closest rabbinic teacher lives in Israel, whose friends live on either the East Coast or the West Coast. You may live in the Midwest. So can we still speak of a local Jewish community, or in the broader general sense? You may think of a person in the world of tomorrow or in the world of today, whose employer is working remotely from Spain, whose colleagues don't even live anywhere, they switch Airbnbs every 6 months, and who communicates with their best friends primarily over Skype or over FaceTime. So what in the world of today is the advantage, or is it even possible to think locally? What is local community now?
Well, local community is actually dealt with in Psalm number 1. To be strong, you need roots somewhere. Whereas the Rishaim, we won't call them wicked, we'll call them just alienated or destabilized, are like chaff blown on the wind. And that's what Facebook culture actually is. You know, whatever is this week's fashion or this week's viral video. I mean, you don't have grinning cats on, do you? I mean, or whatever it is this week. I don't know. You know, this is kamotza shetit venuruach. This is being blown this way and that. That is not an identity. So here it is. In 2011, a British medical charity, Macmillan Nurses, did a survey of young Brits between the ages of 18 and 30. This is 2011, 6 years ago, which in the history of Facebook is quite something, because Facebook just had its bar mitzvah. It's been around for 13 years. It has 2 billion subscribers. So 6 years ago, it was, you know, it was still in cheder, you know. And they asked, how many Facebook friends do you have? And the average answer 6 years ago was 237. When asked, how many of those can you rely on in an emergency, the average answer was 2. A quarter said 1, an eighth said none. That is the difference between a Facebook friend and a real friend. The guy you sit next to in shul, or even better, the guy you don't speak to in shul. But so I was doing a Facebook Live a week or two ago with the head of Facebook in Europe, Nicola Mendelsohn, who I have to tell you is an Orthodox and practicing Jew. And we were talking just that because Mark Zuckerberg has changed the mission statement of Facebook to supporting communities. And the truth is, yes, Facebook can support communities, but it can't create communities. Communities have to be down here on the ground. That's why you need a minyan. That's why you don't drive on Shabbos, so Orthodox Jews live in close proximity to one another. You need those things. And you need face-to-face encounters. And therefore, we came up with this wonderful idea of a digital detox. You know what I mean? In order not to be totally dependent on your smartphone. And my smartphone is a lot smarter than I am, so I've already got an inferiority complex. And I haven't even bought the iPhone X yet, so I mean, I should be completely inadequate then. But the point is, the fact is that one day a week, you've got to switch off the iPhone and meet real people in real time and real space. And I propose, let's call it Shabbos. So, and I think Mark Zuckerberg, and bless him, Mark and Sheryl Sandberg, both this Yom Kippur came out of the closet and sent a Yom Kippur message, Chotasi Ovisi Poshati, to which everyone said, you're absolutely right, you really did. And so here it is. All these technologies can support community, but they can't create and sustain community. And for that, you need physical presence, I, thou, and there's no substitute for it.
There you go.
That's a great piece, isn't it?
It is a great piece, and it showed his ability to switch and use humor, but also to use metaphors that everyone in that audience, or anyone watching that in this day and age, is going to understand and be able to grasp.
Very much so. I think, I think that's the power of a good speaker is to use metaphor, or one of the things that what makes a very much so Sharon. If we just forget how amazing he was, absolutely. The power of a really good speaker is in being able to touch people by speaking to them and using language and examples that actually mean something to them. Here he is, he's talking about Facebook, and he's talking about how many Facebook friends you have, and how you can FaceTime people from one place to another, and how people live in Airbnbs, and how, okay, he was using American language, so West Coast, East Coast, et cetera, et cetera. But whether you call it, you can call it Manchester, Birmingham, London, whatever, whatever you want to do in the same sentence, what he's really saying is we've created over years what was called this global village, right? We call it, we've, and on the one hand, even we really, really benefited from this technology. We still, right now, we're benefiting from this technology. Wouldn't you say so? And yet,
Absolutely.
yeah. So we had Zoom, and we're still doing services on Zoom, and there are people that are still coming to daven with us on Zoom for whatever reason. They're shielding or they're home and they can't come and daven with us in person, so they're davening with us on Zoom. So we still have that, and then we have community, and we have a Monday Night Live, and we have the Tuesday Tea, and we had Challah Live, and we had all these different ideas and these different programs that are happening in shul and around through that amazing medium called the internet. But I think we've had this, you and I had this conversation quite often when we were discussing reopening the shul. And I kept on saying again and again, and I believe that's why when I was watching this, to me, it rung so true, that we can do Monday Night Live every single week or Sunday Night Live every single week for the next 10 years. It's still not the same as standing together, shoulder to shoulder at a kiddush, sharing a kichel. You just can't compare the two. And the amount of community spirit being built through just being together in the same room and sharing a l'chaim, or being in the room next door and singing together with the chazan, or listening to the rabbi, or listening to the reading of the Torah, being called up. All those things, they're experiences of community that actually the virtual community can never really create for us. It never felt right. I don't know about you, but I don't know how many times you did or you didn't, daven together with different minyanim on Zoom. But for me, for the first 3 months when we davened on Zoom, and I davened all three tefillas every single day on Zoom, except for Shabbos, it was a, morning, afternoon, evening, we were davening and davening and davening, but it never felt like shul. And even though I'm looking at the same people, I'm looking at the same people that joined me in shul, it just wasn't shul.
I would maybe even use a more extreme example. There are certain of our rituals that support our life cycle patterns that just aren't the same. And one of the most horrible of those experiences over lockdown was unfortunately having to attend funerals, for instance, over Zoom, which is the most bizarre experience anybody could ever have. And yet it's something that we all experienced firsthand.
Shivers as well. People, there were
Shiva
many
houses,
people that
yeah.
felt that they didn't have a right, they just didn't feel the comfort. And you can have a shiva when you can open up a Zoom and lots of people can visit and everybody gets a chance to speak. But it's not the same as when somebody drives 200 miles and comes through that door. I'll never forget. I'll tell you, this is a story that I always remember. I remember, this is now 2 years ago, very, very recently. If you remember, Rabbi Benji Rickman lost his son. Do you remember when that happened?
I remember.
And I remember I went to Benji Rickman's house, and Harris Fraser told me actually before I go, he says, this Shiva house is just going to blow you away. And I went, and you just sat there and you saw the pain in his. I don't think I've ever been to Shiva house like it. And even if I've been to people that have lost children, but I've never ever been to Shiva house like that Shiva house. And I remember we're sitting there, and the door opens up, and in walks this Hasidic guy with a lady. And Rabbi Benji Rickman was sitting there, he was talking to us, and he looks up to see who walks in, and he says, "Oh my goodness." And he runs over to the fellow, and he puts his head on his shoulders, and he wept just everybody in the room was crying. And he's crying and he's crying and he calls up to his wife. I think it's Emily, come down. You have to see who's coming. And she came down and she hugged them and she's crying and they're all crying. The four of them just sitting and crying and crying, and everybody else is saying they're tearing up. It was such an emotional situation. And then after all of that, he sat down again and he said, when we were newly married, we lived in America. I'm not sure which part of America they lived in, but they lived out in New York, New Jersey, one of those places. And that was our next door neighbor. That guy lived next door to us 20 something years ago when we were newly married. And, we kept up in contact a little bit. We've not seen each other so much over the last 20 years. And I didn't expect him to walk through the door. And when he walked through the door, he said it was just such an emotional time. It just literally, and we all watched him do that. It was just unbelievable. And the raw emotion in that room was, and I must tell you, if the same guy had joined a Zoom call from America and said, hi, Benji, I'm here. I also want to wish you long life. It's not the same.
It's
Just
not
doesn't, it doesn't pack the same punch.
It's
And
not
you
the
feel
same
when
at all.
people come out and really literally come out for you in person at night. It's not like I'm sitting in my office and I'm just doing this quickly. Okay, hi, wish you long life, and then going back to life. I've left my home, I've left my kids behind, I brought some food, and you sit down with them and you really experience the shiva. What a shiva can give a person when it's done as a real event. You see what community can do. You really do.
And this is, I suppose, one of the questions that he was in part asking is, what constitutes a community then? Because we can digitally replicate a lot of our lives and hope that it does. And we had to cope during lockdown. So this is why, Sunday Night Live exists, and that reaches a great deal of people, and it involves people in a conversation digitally. But you're right, to a certain extent. There's no replacement for an in-person event sometimes. But is it just that our weakest moments, so shiva houses, we've used that as an example, or funerals, is that really where we feel the lack of community? Is it when we're not able to attend somebody's chuppah because, those are the happy occasions, a bris, a chuppah, an engagement, whatever that may be? Is it the happier times when we feel the need of community? Where do we feel this lack of community, and where does it come from? What to you is a community, and how is it built?
So there's so many questions over there. I think we'll have to deal with them one at a time, because I think that there are lots of really, really great questions. So I think the first thing that I would say is, obviously, when it comes to life cycle events, we all look towards community, whether it is sad events, whether it's happy events. When I was at a wedding, I remember there was it's just over a year ago, because I remember speaking about the Teva, speaking about the Ark, and David Cohen's daughter Lisa got married, and I hadn't been to a wedding Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Deborah. I must have been, I'm sure it was very, very difficult. It must have been very difficult not being able to have people coming around. But I remember, going to that wedding and literally standing on the chuppah in tears. And I remember speaking and crying, just because I said, I don't know when the next wedding is going to be. We got 15 people in this room, and we got 15 people in the room next door. So that was, because it was COVID safe, because it was 15 was the maximum per room. And it had been counted 30 literally to the number, to the man or to the woman in this instance, for both, and it was such a crazy thing, because you couldn't celebrate those weddings with all the people you would have invited to enjoy the simcha together with you, to who want to celebrate with you, and vice versa. We mentioned before the shiva, as Deborah said over here, that to lose, in her case, to have lost her mother and to not be able to have all those people come and really show their care, that's a big thing. But I think, in a lot of cases, as it is, I think as it is in most of life, if I were to ask you what happened last year on the 15th of August, you probably won't remember. I don't remember what happened last year on the 15th. I don't remember what happened this year on the 15th of August. Because days in general don't stick out unless there's something really, really special that happened. In general, it was another day. I went to work, normal things happen, and I came back home. And unless there's a standout event, there's nothing really that goes on in your head that says, wow, that was special. It was just a regular day. I went to work. I did what I had to do. I took care of my kids. I shopped. I spent time with my wife. I went to sleep. That was it. But I think that community is much deeper than that, because you cannot, and I believe this very strongly, and we see this. You cannot build a community based on simchas, on tzaras alone. And unfortunately, there are many people within our communities whom we only see when there's a simcha, when there's a tzara. So when there's a simcha, something the shul has 300 people at a bar mitzvah, 400 people at a bar mitzvah. Everybody comes and everybody celebrates, and whether they walk or whether they drive by car, and Rabbi Sacks was speaking about that before, or whatever it is. But you get all these people that come and they're there and they enjoy the simcha. But many of them are not people that will go to a community on a regular basis. They're not really plugged in over there. And the sad thing, therefore, is I see them at a bar mitzvah and I see them at a simcha, and to me, many times, they look like strangers in their own home, if you know what I mean. Many of them don't even get a siddur. Certainly, most of them don't get a chumash. Most of them don't know what's going on in the davening. Where's the rabbi up to? Where's the chazan up to? Why is he standing by the Torah now for so long? How long is this going to take? When is this, And it becomes, as Harris once or twice mentioned to me, this word of an endurance challenge for many people. And I think the reason it's an endurance challenge is if you only dip in at simchas, so you're not really part of it. I don't know. I mean, to me, the example would be, I don't know, are you a football fan at all?
No, not particularly, no.
Not particularly.
But
Okay.
if I choose to support them, then yeah, Manchester United. After last night, I can't promise you anything.
Right, okay. But I know there's a lot of people in our shul that are big football fans. But imagine if I said to you, I'm a big, big football fan, because last year, Manchester City made it to the Champions League final, and I went to watch the Champions League final. So, but do you follow them on a weekly basis? No. I only follow them when they're, when the Champions League, when they're in the semifinal and the final. Then you're not a fan. Do you know what I mean? You can't only be a fan who shows up to the Champions League final. The real fans are the guys that show up every single day, that, who live, eat, drink, and breathe whatever team it is that you are. Do you know what I mean?
So those are the true fans. You're right. That follow a football team through thick and thin. And to use a more common analogy, everybody supports Manchester City nowadays, but the true from supporters were the people that supported them 10, 20 years ago, before they had all the money and the success that came with it. So, they were the great supporters, and now you have people that are, glory supporters, I suppose. And you do have aspects of that within religious devotion, that we will come together as a community at certain key times of the year. If I could then throw perhaps a different perspective on that, somebody who accepts what you've just said may also say, well, this is the problem with religion, and this is the problem with our religion, or modern day religion, if you like, that it doesn't appeal to those masses, that we cannot fill those benches every week, that we cannot get people engaged, that it does feel like an endurance test. And the reason that people don't know when, or asking when is the rabbi going to stop talking, or when is Lenin going to finish, because they have no other expression of or understanding of a service. So it's a conversation I've had with say Alex many times when it comes to the understanding of davening, for instance. He feels that we've lost total contact with the text in most cases. Are we failing people these days by not making it more relevant? I mean, James made a very interesting comment about Rabbi Sacks, that he made Torah relevant to the average person, so it made sense, and even for non-Jews. Are we guilty of not doing the same with our services and our communal life?
So I would say, on one hand, yes, and then on the other hand, no. So on the one hand, yes, can we make the services more relevant? Yeah, I think we could maybe make certain parts of the service more relevant. But on the other hand, I think people have to understand that there is something that has maybe a life of its own, which we'll call Judaism. And that Judaism that has a life of its own, you need to really appreciate it for what it is to really enjoy it. And, if I were to sort of call up Manchester City, to go back to the football analogy, and if I could get through to Pep Guardiola and say, look, Pep, I know you enjoy attacking football, but I love it if you just put 10 people in the back and just make sure they don't score any goals. That's how I want it. Because to me, that's more relevant than watching your guys run to the front. So everybody's going to have their opinion of what Pep Guardiola's team selection should be, and whether it is Ole Gunnar Solskjaer or Pep Guardiola. I'm not choosing one over the other. To me, it doesn't make a difference, because I have one blue and one red at home at the moment. So, it's not really, and to me, it's not so relevant either way around. I'm not a fan of one way or the other. I'm saying you can, on the one hand, you can say, how can we make, and I think a lot of modern day things need to think about keeping relevant to their people. So when they created this Super League, and all these top flight teams were going to create the Super League, a lot of people said, hey, you guys aren't going to be relevant anymore, because what's happening now is you're turning basically this whole thing into a money-making thing. And for us, the fans, it's not only about money. And they had lost touch with what the regular person wanted, so they had to come down from that. But on the other hand, you can't have every Tom, Dick, and Harry calling up Pep Guardiola or Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and telling them what kind of football they want. Or, to make it more attractive to me, you need to be doing X, or you need to be playing Y, because it's not really your choice. And so it puts us in a bit of a bind, that on the one hand, yes, I think, and Rabbi Sacks was amazing at this. And I think in general, this is the job really of a middle of the road synagogue, shul, and rabbi, is to try and take ancient wisdom and make it modern enough for them, And the problem is, and I would go back to what Phil Morrison says. Phil Morrison just says, give them a kiddush and they'll all be there. We have so many people in shul where I could be serving anything in shul and they're just not coming. And sometimes if you have the conversation with some of the people in shul, says, what could I do? That's an interesting one. Okay.
No. I think to be fair to Deborah, she's misspelled Judaism. So I'm not going to put. I will not put the.
I was like, what is that? What was the comment there? I couldn't.
No, I think Deborah meant to say that Judaism is a team sport. It's also not just a team sport. We could say it's a contact sport. It's one that you need to be able to get sort of in front of somebody as well. You and I spoke before tonight, and we briefly discussed how we were going to handle this material and how we might talk about it. And we did talk about that disconnect, that sometimes people who are struggling in whatever way with faith or belief, when they get to shul, they're disappointed by what they see there, that it doesn't that perhaps doesn't resonate with them so much. And I said to you that from somebody who, even by his own admission, not sometimes the biggest shul goer you will ever meet, but I understand that coming to shul and being part of a community, and certainly from sort of occupying the position that I've had the honor of occupying, it seems to me it's not like turning up at a theater and watching a show, where that show's either good and you love it and you'll come back again, or it won't be good and you'll vote with your feet and never come back again. The part of being part of a community has to come from you. You have to be able to. It's a two-way relationship. You cannot just show up at shul and expect shul to be for you and to completely resonate with you 100% if you're not willing to play into that relationship and get involved. A lot of people have asked, well, why do we bother sending out things like surveys, for instance, and asking people's opinions? You know what it's like when you ask 100 Jews for their opinion. Imagine what it's like when you ask 750 Jews for their opinion.
And they
It
all
can
say
get
the same
very
thing.
heated.
Jews always have the same opinion, right?
But the point is, in order to have that community, it cannot just be a one-way relationship. It can't just be you turn up and get served whatever shul is serving you and not be willing to give back. So therefore, people's opinion and people's participation is what is needed by a shul. And it's very well to lay that at the door of our lay leadership, or to lay it at the door of modern lay leadership in general, and to say, Judaism doesn't serve us the type of Judaism that we want. It doesn't keep us occupied. I would say roll your sleeves up, get in there, and and make it the change that you want to see.
Yes and no, because I think there will be certain lines where people say I'd like to see change, and they'll be pushing quite heavily against people that are not advocating towards change, religious leadership, lay leadership that are not advocating towards change. And sometimes the change that people want is really not warranted within what traditional Judaism is. So on the one hand, yes, it's like you said, it's important to listen to everybody, to get everybody's opinion. And the other point that you make, I think, is very important. Do we have to book for shul this week? Really? Okay.
You carry on. I'll bring the comments up in a second.
Okay, we'll come back to those comments. But I think that, what you mentioned before about it, being involved, I think it's really important, as you said, and we had this conversation before about a lot of people feeling disenfranchised from what goes on in shul, because even if they come, it's somebody here, said to me, I spoke to some of my friends, and a lot of them said, I'm not even sure I believe. And it makes for a very weird experience in shul, because you're showing up over here to a service that's going to be over 2 hours, from start to finish, when you're not even sure you believe in what the service is all about. I'm not even sure I believe in a higher being, not me, but I'm not. If somebody says to me, I'm not even sure I believe in a higher being, then coming to shul for 2 hours is going to be a frustrating. It's going to be a frustrating experience. I can't see it as anything else other than a frustrating experience.
It's interesting because going back to Judaism as a whole, and what perhaps Deborah had said before about it being a team sport. It's one of the things that Rabbi Sacks says, that Judaism is an insistently communal faith. That there have been belief systems that emphasize the individual, and for them, the primary religious experience is a private communion of the soul with God. And that's never been the Jewish way. It's all about what you get out of being together as a community. If you look at the way that we daven, we can't daven without a quorum, without a minyan, which is that is just the way that it works. You need to have a community, and everything that we do is built around community, and that faith and that system of religion comes with the community, as opposed, you can't really separate it out sometimes. Let's have a
Yes
look.
and no, because I think people need to really have their own basic faith in order to really be able to engage with the community. If a person is struggling with their own faith, whether it is because they're struggling because of a trauma or something that they're going through, or because they just feel they never really got to grips with this, they never really truly believe, whatever it means,
Yeah.
right? But either which way, these people, you can shove them in a room together with a whole bunch of other people. It's not really going to give you any meaningful experience, because it's still going to leave you dry, because you're like, but why am I doing this? And what's it all about? And I think that, the basics that we, that some people take for granted, or for other people, they say, it's faith, and I just don't believe. And others say, well, it's not faith. And to me, it's sort of logical, or whatever you want to call it. These are discussions that need to be had. And I think even if the discussions are had, are people really, people want to engage? And people need to ask themselves, how much do I want to engage? Because I think people who dip in and dip out, yes, they'll be very disappointed in general about what they get out of it, because I think from dipping in and out, you never get the full picture, you never get the full flavor. Have a look at some of the comments.
We're going to have a look at some of the comments because the comments are great. But just to touch very briefly on something that Rabbi Sacks said there, he talked about a digital detox and the fact that we are all very much involved in the way that the world turns the whole time digitally. It makes us cynical as well, because we have this constant broadcast of ideas and humor and messages and irreverence and so on. We don't have maybe the same respect for faith as we once did, because it's watered down into 30-second chunks on Facebook or whatever it may be. And so really to get a grip on that and to get a handle on that, it's hard for people to have the same level of faith. And somebody today in the run up to this discussion asked me what my view of faith was, and whether or not belief in God and the system of religion is something that's easy to swallow. I'll tell you something.
What do they mean with easy to swallow?
Well, the in this day and age, how can somebody was saying, in this day and age, how can you believe that there's a world to come, that when we end on this earth, that there are good things waiting for us, and that the reward is in the world to come and not now, and all of this. And to me, I'll tell you something. If it was down to a choice, Rabbi, if you turn around to an average congregant and said, don't you want to believe? Of course they want to believe, especially that person that's had a harrowing, traumatic experience in their life, because having a system of faith would help them, because but it's not easy to do sometimes. It's really not easy to do. It's something that maybe you're brought up with, and to a certain extent all of us are brought up with. But in this day and age, with the cynicism that's out there, it's sometimes hard for people to make that leap of faith.
Yeah, but I think I would add to that. There's a famous story that I love to tell, which I find is just really encapsulates this. There's a famous rabbi who was also very, very wealthy, and he found an investment that was just a brilliant investment, and he was going to make this investment. It was going to triple or quadruple his money, and he literally went all in on this investment. And the boat sank with all the stuff, with all the schira, and he'd gone to destitute. And everybody asked the question, they were like, who's going to tell the rabbi? Who's going to tell the rabbi? Because, this is in the olden days when they didn't have modern communication. We would have known. So basically what happened is that, one of the Talmidim, one of his students came forward and he said to him, listen, Rabbi, the Talmud says that a person has to make a blessing on anything bad that happens in the same way that he makes a blessing on something good that happens. So how do people do that? That doesn't make sense. How does that work? So the rabbi says, well, you believe everything's from God, right? Yes. So the good's from God. Yeah. And the bad's from God also. Yeah. And God means everything for your good, right? Yes. Well, then you can make the blessing for the good, for the bad. The same. He says, no, but I don't understand it. And they went through the same conversation 6 or 7 times. And the rabbi keeps on saying the same thing. If everything's from God and you understand it's all good, etc., he goes through the whole thing. And then finally, after 5 or 6 or 7 of these conversations, the student says, well, I need to tell you, Rabbi, all of your schira went down with the boat in the thing. In the sea, and the rabbi fainted. And when the rabbi woke up, he looked at the congregation, he looked at his Talmud, and he says, "You know what? That question is actually a pretty good question." The reason I like to tell this story is because it's easy to talk about faith when you're not being tested. God is good, and I woke up this morning and I got into my car and my car turned on and I came to daven and it went okay and my kids were okay and we are Hashem, But when a person goes through tsaras, chas v'shalom, and now he's got, sometimes it's not, and I don't even know if it's often somebody saying I don't believe or somebody saying I'm just so angry, right? And that their lack of faith is not really a lack of faith; it's just anger in the system, saying like, God, why did you do this to me? I've always been a good person. I don't think I deserve this. And and sometimes you say to yourself, well, there can't be a God because I don't deserve this. How can God do this? Well, maybe there is no God.
Well, then maybe we need to stop teaching our children that living your life entirely as a good person is not a guarantee that everything is going to go well for you, but it is a guarantee that you're going to have a cohesive community that you can work and live within. and that we look after each other, you stand half a chance of paying that forward. You'll get it back, because we as a community, we need that as animals, as
Yeah,
creatures that
sure, as
live
social beings.
together, 100%. And that's the guarantee. But this fairy tale version of sometimes of I've been guilty of doing it myself. You answer questions by, because that's the way it is, and that's what Hashem said, and that's, we answer existential questions posed by our children very simply, but sometimes we don't do them any favors by serving up a version of religion that works on total justice, because sometimes that isn't life.
Yeah.
Like modern history and recent history in the past 100 years has taught us that we can be as pious as we wish to be, does not get us. It's not a get out of jail card at all.
No, no. I think it's important that we teach our children. I think that people used to say that the language that I used to hear people say basically is life's not fair. And I never liked that, because then you're teaching your kids really that God's not fair in what he does. I think really the what we need to teach our children is life doesn't always work out the way you think it does. Life is fair because God is fair and God is just. That's one of the things that we believe, because if God wasn't just, then what's the point of doing anything, right? But God is just. But just because you don't see why it's just doesn't mean it's not just. But you have to say life works differently than what you think it has. And why does life have to work the way you think it has to work? Maybe life works differently. And I think we need to teach our kids that, and it gives them strength. But when a person is going through a personal trauma, a personal tragedy, or whatever it is, an illness, a loss, whatever, people ask the question, and I don't think the question is wrong, but I think oftentimes the question is being asked from pain rather than from disbelief or from non-believing.
Let's all great perspectives, and it's great we can have both sides of that discussion, and it's very much plays into community. So before anybody tells us we've rambled off topic, I think this is really getting to the nub of it. But let's have a look at some of the comments here. Jane Johnson, good evening, Jane. She says, I think making Torah learning relevant is a very different thing from changing davening or service in shul to make it more relevant. That is true. That is true.
I agree with that. I think I was trying to say that Torah learning should be relevant to people, but I think if you start changing the service, you'll end up changing the service all the time for each person with their whim and will, and it's not gonna lead us in the right direction.
Let's have a look at Clive Musbarkney. Shul attendance is what is the norm for the community. Haredim attend 3 times a day because that's normal for them, and United Synagogue members attend mainly on Shabbos because that is what is the norm for United Synagogue type of communities.
That's true, but I think if United Synagogue Jews came 3 times a day, many of them would be very, very frustrated, because they're already frustrated for the 2 hours that they come on a Shabbos. To come every single day for Shachris Mincha Maariv, for many people, would be just too much to bear. And I think the relevance needs to be there for people to want to make that change, or people make the change in order to honor their parents and to say Kaddish. But that hasn't made the service more relevant to them. It's just a feeling of honor and a feeling of
Obligation
that they owe to their, obligation to their parents, more than a meaningful service.
Let's hear from another Clive. Clive says, generally, it is not that people are anti-religious, but they drift as a shul. We do not educate. Is Clive arguing there for understanding?
I think so. But I think also as he feels, I've had conversations with Clive in this instance. Clive Sayers, quite a few times about the idea of drift, and he says that he's often said to me, he says that people aren't really trying to move away from Yiddishkeit. It's just there's nothing keeping them in Yiddishkeit because there's nothing relevant for them, so they automatically end up drifting away from Yiddishkeit. But not because they've made a conscious decision to say, oh, this Judaism thing is rubbish. Nobody has just been able to come in and educate them in a way where they say, hey, there's something really serious going on over here. There's something very worthwhile that I need to continue to explore.
And I'm not convinced there's anywhere more worthwhile to necessarily go to. I'm not saying that's a reason for people to stay where they are, but entering a world where there is no faith, there is no ritual, there is no pattern to communal life, it can be a very lonely existence if you wake up one morning and all of a sudden everything you had as your guide, your moral guide through life has been ripped away from you because you've had a change of heart. That is a deeply unsettling experience for a lot of people as well.
I didn't watch it, but I
Ivor,
don't know if you watched Unorthodox. Did you watch that film Unorthodox on Netflix? I didn't watch it, but people speak about it. But the idea of
dipped
people
in and out
leaving
of
the
it.
fold, and there is a lot of trauma that comes with it. Did you watch that?
Absolutely. Okay, Ivor. Good evening, Ivor. This
Hi,
is
Ivor.
all well. Ivor starting that sentence. This is all well and good, but how are we going to reach people who are not currently interested because they think it is not relevant to them and that it is for other people? Rabbi, don't take this bit as an insult, but he says the
No, I
rabbi
try not
seldom
to.
says anything that needs a PhD to understand. And what he means by that is we don't make things difficult for people to understand. So, for instance, when you're giving a sermon, they're very much, or a shir, it's very much given in language and terms that people can easily digest.
Right, and I would say to that, Ivor, I'm not. I don't take that as a. I don't take that as a as an insult. I take that as a compliment because yes, I can give a different kind of share, and I know people that have seen me speak to some of my other colleagues and Baruch Hashem, I'm respected in that side as well, and there needs to be a little bit more. How would I put it? You have to put a little bit more into it in order for people to really give you that respect. But I know that our community, this is not. It's not what we speak to them, and because it's not what we speak to them, so therefore, I'm not trying to dumb it down. I'm trying to make it something that will be relevant. And in order to make it relevant, I think there are, on the one hand, and I would, go back and say this, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but I was reading some of the excerpts on these, communities and conversations by Rabbi Sacks, and I found that I really had to sit and focus and strain to understand everything that Rabbi Sacks was saying, because it's highly intelligent, it's highly intellectual, and it needs real thought to sit and understand it. And for me, at least, when I sit down to read a book, I don't want to have to strain as much. I just don't have it. It's not my way of doing things, and therefore I try to educate in that way as well.
See, Ivor says, yes, it was intended as a compliment to the task of getting
Ivor.
people to find out how easy it is. Let's have a look at a slightly different comment here from Clive Moss Barkley. He simply says, by changing what the leaders of the community do, the rest will follow. It sounds tremendously simple when you say it out loud, but very often in life,
But what
leaders
does
of
he mean?
communities. Well, I'd invite Clive to elaborate on that if he likes a little bit
Yeah,
whilst
could
we
you
meet the
elaborate
next.
on that? Because I don't really understand it. Let's even assume that David Mintz and Ian Creek and Paul Davis and Gary Hershkowitz and Richard Elton and Adam Shaw came 3 times a day to davening every single day. I don't think it would change anything for anyone. So I'm not sure what it means by changing the leader of the community. Or was an answer to Ivor's question.
Yeah. You know what, that sort of the leadership setting an example these days unfortunately only goes so far, because we are shown in life that modern role models, whether that be, I'm not just talking about in our community, but if you look in the outside world at politicians, at famous people, at actors, at whoever it is, some of the examples that they set, or are not amazing examples for a start, but also we shouldn't be setting people up to fail, putting people on a pedestal and saying that is what we should emulate. I mean, look at Rabbi Sacks. Is that what we should all emulate? I'd love to say to all of you tonight listening that the best thing that you could do to honor his legacy is to read what he did, and to engage in conversations with people in your communities. What we're having tonight, there's a discussion, and a lot of people will say are no answers. But by batting these ideas about, by voicing these ideas and arguments aloud, and seeing both sides of that coin and examining it, it's very much what he was all about and what he wanted, and the answers for you to find. And maybe that's the best way to do it. Let's have a look at Sharon Hood's comment here. Last Kabbalat Shabbat on United Synagogue, Rabbi Lou of Stanmore spoke in between each part to explain a little bit about it. It was so interesting. Could we have a real explanatory service, which might be more interesting for some people, to encourage connection with the davening? The Aish explanatory services in previous years around Yomim Noraim were so well attended, evidently a popular need. That's an interesting way of doing it, and I think we did. I remember on the last, I think it was the last Shabbat UK, we had an interesting thing that we read in between. Whoever came up for a mitzvah effectively would read a little bit about what that parsha was going to talk about. We explained certain things that were happening in shul. In fact, I think it was partly an idea that Robert Festenstein had come up with.
Yes, I remember that. Yes,
it was a great idea because we never told them what to say. They put it in their own words, and sometimes, I think that may be something that we need to go back and do, not just when it's Shabbat UK, but maybe more regularly. Here's Jane. That sounds a good way of making the service more accessible and meaningful without changing it.
I think she's talking about Sharon's comments.
Yeah, she was. There are various ways to learn via discussion on various topics which are really relevant to them. Clive again, US members who start attending 3 times a day move to Haredi shuls. Our leaders need to commit themselves more to building our community. I'm sure, or I'd like to hope that leaders in general are committed to building communities. I think we need to sort of work out, not just in our shul, but in society as a whole, what are the values that we wish to hold? What are those ground rules that we wish our communities to be built upon going forward? And by discussing those, we can make plans for the future. And yes, it is for the leadership to show some of the way, but we're going to need everybody on board in order to achieve that. Rabbi, we could talk for hours and hours and hours.
I think we'd start boring everybody else around us.
I think so, but it is a very interesting discussion. There are many. This is just some of the part of the discussion that Rabbi Sacks talks about. There is a link. We'll put that up again afterwards, and you'll be able to read these things. There are some last minute comments coming in, so let's just have a look at those very quickly. Clive Mosbarkley, the rabbi can't be expected to do it on his own. He's quite right. It needs everybody on board, Clive.
I really think that whilst you say that the rabbi can be expected to do it on his own, I think the main thing for people is, I think if people come and people start to engage, I found it almost every single time, and I've heard it from so many people that have come for the year of saying Kaddish, etc., etc. When people start to engage, they start to realize, hey, wait a second, the shul thing actually has a lot more to offer than I thought originally. The rabbi has more to offer than I thought originally. The chazan has more to offer than I thought originally. And I think sometimes if you just nip in and nip out, you just don't appreciate what it is. And it takes coming and actually investing yourself in it to start to realize, wait a minute, there's more to this Judaism thing that meets the eye, and it's actually a lot more meaningful and a lot more powerful than I ever could have imagined. It's just I didn't give it a chance. And to give me the opportunity to speak to people as a one-off here or there is not going to change people. I think people only change when they make a conscious effort to change themselves and say, you know what, I'll start coming once a day. I'll start coming twice a week, but I come literally. So that, that there could be a lot of things. I mean, and look, you see, there's a lot of stuff that's going on over here.
There's a lot of stuff that's coming in. Well, I'm going to just get through some of this, and I'll briefly comment on each one. We're not going to go into massive amount of detail because I'm sure you've all got great stuff to do still tonight. So Philip Morrison has said small groups of different age groups is the way. And Phil, whilst you're correct, it allows you to deliver the content that is most suitable for that audience. What you don't want to do as a shul is break yourselves up into so many groups that we do not feel like a cohesive community anymore. So we have to be careful, but you are right.
People have gone upside down.
Ivor says, can I mention something that Raveli Stefanski says? It's not the daf, it's the omi. So it's not what you're learning, it's the fact that it's regular. So a little bit of regular learning did it for Ivor.
And it's a great comment, by the way, because this Eli Stefanski has a Daf Yomi share where 8,000 people worldwide listen to his Daf Yomi every day. And yet he says, listen, it's not about the fact that you do the entire page every single day, but the fact that you do something every single day. And I think if we could get people in our shul to do something every single day, and every person with whatever they're comfortable with, if they turned it into Yomi, you'd start to see noticeable differences.
I 100% agree, and even just discussing this, even if you don't hold the same beliefs or you don't have a level of faith, you can't ignore the fact that just discussing different points of view, almost like the Gemara does in theoretical terms, is extremely good for your brain. It's extremely good for being able to think, and good ideas come out of these things. And Sharon has said, looks like we could usefully have more discussions about some of these ideas, please. 100%. I'm going to be
what I would say is that StreamYard is not the best way to do it.
No,
if
it isn't.
We want to have this discussion. This needs to be an in-person discussion.
I was going to say
people are not getting a chance really to give their opinion. To write on the side over here is not giving people the real chance.
No, well, I was going to say actually that it is a very brave idea, and again, it's one of those things that we have to say, COVID permitting, and that everybody should feel comfortable with it. But I would very much welcome the opportunity to do a Sunday night live discussion in person together with the audience there, in a way that they could stand up and ask questions and involve, and as a congregation and as a community, we can actually have an open conversation in that room. And maybe over the course of a couple of hours one evening, we can actually make some plans together as a community as how we go forward and improve on some of the issues that we have. So
I'd say once every 4 weeks. I don't, we've turned Sunday Night Live into fortnightly. So if we said once every 4 weeks, we have it in person, and once every 4 weeks, you have it or once every 2 weeks. It's 2 weeks, 2 weeks, and then, you put it in the Nat Barkley. The Nat Barkley is a big room. We can make a socially distanced section and a not socially distanced section. So for both people, if you want, we can even put out food and we can put out drinks. And I actually think that, it'd be really interesting to see. I always thought that people come because it's easy to watch from
Can you see how Rabbi Sacks and Monday Night Live have dragged people back into shul? They want to be a part of the discussion. This is fantastic.
It's brilliant. I love it.
Adult ed, maybe the way that people can engage. Deborah, this is part and parcel of adult ed. You're quite right. Clive also has some ideas, and Joseph Stone, 99 Tanakh is a good everyday project.
There's a daily learning of Tanakh. You can look it up, Google it, you'll find it. And they have a certain amount of Tanakh learning every single day. I know Joseph's been doing it. I think Adam Shoga also does it, actually.
Sharon Hood is schlepping nachas there. Thanks for showing pictures of my grandchildren's sofa. It is our pleasure, Sharon. I'd like to thank everybody for participating in the discussion this evening. The great thing about our discussions is that they are not in any way scripted, and they are led by you as the audience. So we always end up at a completely different point. But to bring it back in, Rabbi, I'm going to let you have the last words, and perhaps you'll close on something related to Rabbi Sacks's inspiration. And we will take this discussion has only just started. We will
Absolutely.
take this further.
Yeah. So I think maybe I'll finish with the following story. I remember once being in a place in Austria, out in the Alps. It was called Saalbach, and at the time, Saalbach had after a year or two, there was a non-Jewish individual there that wanted to become a Jew, a ger, and then changed his mind. But he was very, very knowledgeable of all types of Jews, and this non-Jew, created a kosher restaurant. And when he created this kosher restaurant, the first year he had 100 people there, and the next year he had 300 people there, and suddenly the town was overrun with Jews. There were like 1,000 Jews that would come there. And if you imagine in the middle, in the center of Austria, that has never seen Jews before, 1,000 frum Jews descend on this tiny little derfele. It was quite a sight to see. And I remember playing golf. We were playing crazy golf, and somebody heard that I spoke German, so they came over and says, "Excuse me, can I ask you a question?" I said, "Yeah, sure." They said, "Are you guys having like a conference over here? Like, what's with all the people?" And I said to them at the time, I said, "Listen, Judaism is very much like we said, it's a team sport, but it also needs a certain amount of infrastructure. And as soon as you build that infrastructure, then everybody links into that infrastructure. It's like if you have a town that has very, very few jobs, then nobody wants to move there. And if you create a new mall over there and new jobs and things like that, people start moving there, they start building it, everything in the town starts moving and shaking, but you need to create that infrastructure. Our Jewish communities are our infrastructure that keep us going, that allow us to come together. And on the one hand, as Rabbi Sacks said, they're so important. It's important to live within walking distance of a community. It's important to engage with community. It's important for you to really feel part of that Jewish community, because that's part of your identity. On the other hand, it's just as important for you as an individual to feel that you have a place in that community. Being in that community is something that is beneficial to you and that it's meaningful to you. Otherwise, you're part of a community, but it's meaningless. And I think if we take the ideas of Rabbi Sacks, understanding that Jews are very much communal beings, and we really are. You look around everywhere, we've always been about community. And you start to invest yourself in your community and allow yourself either to be guided by your community, or if you want to be really, really big, step forward and say, I want to make a step in helping guide my community. Not that the community will guide me. Maybe I'll become a lay leader and I will guide. Either which way, these are great ways of us to engage. And this way, together, we will grow. Together, we will feel a sense of community, not just virtually, but in real life. And that community then builds a stronger relationship between each other and a strong relationship between ourselves and God. So I hope you all found this useful. Thank you very much. Tonight, again, was the Ilui Nishmas Rabbi Sacks. Let me just see if we have over here the name as well. It doesn't have this Hebrew name here. Or maybe is it at the end of this? I remember it was here somewhere. I can't find it now. Either which way, it is in the memory of Chief Rabbi Sacks, his Neshama Shanam and Aliyah, the Torah learning that we did tonight, the ideas that we have tonight, and maybe the inspiration that will come for people from listening to tonight that will maybe make a small change in their lives, should all be a credit to his Neshama. He's got tremendous amounts of credits on this in the Olam HaElyon already, in the upper worlds and the upper spheres, for everything that he did for Judaism and for Jewish people. And, his example should be a shining example to us, and together we should grow together as a community, as individuals in our Judaism, and in our appreciation of who this giant was that we had amongst us.
Amen. Thank you very much, everybody.
Everybody.
Watch out for Sunday Night Live coming to a Hilton Suite near you. We're going to work out the details. Sorry?
Sunday Night Live.
Sunday Night Live. We'll try and make that happen as soon as possible. Very much looking forward to seeing people there, and hope to be able to deliver that in a safe and sensible way as well. Take care. Have a good rest of the week, and we'll see you on Shabbos, right?
All the best. Take care. See you.
See you soon.